Urdu is actually pronounced as Urdu, and literally the word is a Turkish word, which really means a camp or a camp post, if you will. And the reason being because Urdu is what is known as Lashkari. Lashkar means a battalion, if you will, or a group of soldiers, if you will, in the sense that it was a language that, if we go into the, so it's actually here on this screen, if you can see a bit of my notes where it says it's an adapted form of Arabic script. So yes, we do use, and in a minute I'll show you the language, the letters that are used. And so it's an adapted form of Arabic script. But during the 8th century, the Persians began to use the Arabic script. So initially, the Persians had their own sounds and own letters, well, their own sounds really, but then they used the Arabic script and certain modifications to add a few letters that were customary to the Persian sounds. But interestingly, of course, these sounds are not in the Arabic language. And then 7 centuries later, invaders of India, and that's where the language of Urdu is considered a camp language, or the word is interchangeably used as army. So even in modern day Turkish language, Urdu refers to an army, if you will. So the reason being that the invaders of India came from Central Asia, adding more letters to write the languages spoken in Delhi, India at the time. And this language eventually comes to be known as Urdu. Once again, given the comparison to English, we are writing right to left. So I personally love writing it, or my interest, slight interest in art. I like to do some calligraphy when I can. And it's a very fluent script. But Urdu has also influenced other languages spoken in Pakistan. And if we look at some regional languages, which are like Pashto, spoken in the north, or Kashmiri language, again, going in the north part of Pakistan, and even Punjabi, which is, I believe, Shahid's first language, if I'm not mistaken, you can see the roots of Urdu that have been taken in account from the language itself. Although, you know, Punjabi is written by Sikhs in India, and they use their own script. They do not use the Arabic script. They use their script known as Gurmukhi. So there are 36 letters in the Urdu alphabet. However, I don't know if these are the letters that sort of, if you can see, they are sort of clustered. So starting from, again, right to left, the first straight line would be Aleph, and then the second boat with I guess I could refer to it as a boat with a dot in the middle, is called Bay. And that would be roughly the equivalent sound of B in English. And then a boat with 3 dots in the bottom, that would be a roughly equivalent sound of P. And then a soft T, thick, with the 2 dots at the top. And then a little symbol or icon on this boat, which is like the letter T. So if you were to write Tom, you would use this. And I'm not going to go through all of the alphabets, because I'm sure when you're first getting familiar with the sounds of a language, you're not going to remember the nuances. But if you can see that these sounds are also not, not only are they different from the Arabic language, but they are also not commonly found in the English language. And therefore, sometimes when you see the native speakers of Urdu pronouncing certain words in English, that's because their mind and tongue phonetically has been trained with these sounds. And it's not always easy to adapt to the English sounds that native speakers. I also thought it would be interesting to show the lettering in Urdu. So again, the influence of numbers rather in Urdu is also borrowed from the Arabic numerals. And I think by now, I think we all know the contribution of zero from the Arabic numerals to the Western world. And if you look at it, and if you have not really paid attention, this is a slightly inverted 2. If you look at it, this is a slightly inverted 3, sitting sideways. And 1 is obviously 1. And then 5, 4, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And then after that, it's all a combination of the different. Let me stop real quick. Any questions thus far? Any comments? Anything that has struck you so far? Please feel free to stop me.
Mira, can I add a couple of things for everyone's benefit?
Absolutely.
Okay, this is Shahid here. Urdu is my kind of mother language. I grew up with Urdu, and I know quite a bit about it. There are a couple of things I wanted to share with you, and that is that this language, as Samira rightfully traced it, its origin lies with the conquerors of India from the West, from the Central Asia. So it carries in it elements of Persian, of Arabic, of Turkish language. And then it intermingled with Sanskrit in India, and it became a communicative language between the rulers and the ruled in about 7 or 8 centuries ago. And today Urdu is understood by a majority of the people living in the Indian subcontinent. Although in India, Hindi has taken over in the written form, but the spoken Urdu and spoken Hindi is almost the same. So one could safely say that this language is understood by about 1 billion people in the subcontinent.
Very good. You took away some of the slides that were coming in the future, but nonetheless, that's great that you gave them a good overview. So I wanted to kind of show what Urdu language newspapers look like. I mean, it's one thing to go from these letters, but once they are joined, this is what they kind of look like in print. And as you can tell, that's quite a, I personally think it's quite a pretty or very graphic style of writing. And if I can point out that when you see, can you see my cursor on that straight alif? When you see that, when you see the little dash at the end of that letter, that indicates a certain inflection. And that changes the way the word is going to be pronounced. So for instance, that little inflection, that little symbol right there tells me where the inflection is going, or that little inflection right there tells me where the inflection is going. Now, having said that, or if I can point out to a slight little symbol right here, that tells me which letter is going to be conjoined with another letter, so to speak. However, as is commonly the case, when you've written this language enough, you really don't need to put the inflections, because people normally understand, and it would be quite cumbersome to keep writing it with those inflection points, if you will. But I thought it's important to point out that I could pronounce that word as unkalab, unkalab, but because I know that there is an inflection there, it tells me that the correct pronunciation of that word is inqilab, which, by the way, means revolution. Okay, so let's look at some of the language differences between English and Urdu. So in English, we follow a subject, verb, object, language order. But in Urdu, we follow the subject, object, verb, language order. So roughly equivalent would be dog bites a man, dog a man bites, if you will. And in English, we use prepositions that come before nouns to form prepositional phrases. But in Urdu, you use postpositions which are inflected on a noun to show location. In is translated as may. You know, room is translated as kamre. Now again, without getting into too much of the grammatical nuance, a room becomes plural, kamre. And so the room is, in the room is translated as kamre mein. Native postpositions come after the noun, if you will. But in English, we use the prepositions that come before nouns to form prepositional phases. In the room, right? All right, moving on. Urdu has 3 different verb forms known as base or root, causative form, and causative form 2. So my entire structure changes depending on how formally I want to address the other person. The verb changes, the noun changes. You know, meeting somebody for the first time is a very formal form of introduction. And obviously, adding to the complexity of that, the verbs are then divided into 5 categories. And then there is also the feminine or the singular, a feminine and the masculine, the singular and the plural. So one has to keep those rules of grammar in place. And towards the end, I'm going to make some comments of where the challenges are for the language itself. But amazingly, as I've written, there can be over 60 different forms of the verb read. I mean, 60 different forms of the word read. Now, as Shahid was explaining, that Urdu, as I've highlighted in these areas, is one of the 2 official languages of Pakistan and is largely spoken in some regions of India. And it is actually an official language of 5 Indian states, if you can believe that. All right. But so besides that, it's interesting that Urdu is spoken widely in the UK because there's a large diaspora of South Asian community. Majority of the Urdu speakers in UK are identifying themselves as having Pakistani heritage. And there are many areas in Britain with large numbers of Urdu speakers. In fact, I mean, I think there are communities in Houston, in Chicago, in other major cities like New York, where there are pockets of immigrants where you can actually see Urdu billboards because people want to create that feeling of home. And of course, because the colonizers were there, it is natural that when labor migrated to Britain from South Asia, there is a large concentration of Pakistani or Urdu-speaking natives. And so many times I think, like they say that in 2000, London found that Urdu and its sister language, Hindi, came in as fifth in the top 10 most spoken languages in London. Fifth. That's quite sobering, isn't it? So, and today there are a lot of resources for learning Urdu online. Urdu language learning resources, a wide variety of tools. And if you do want, I can definitely pass along my PowerPoints to you, Evan, so you can share it with others.
Yes, that would be fantastic, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay. So moving along then, I thought, I had no idea Shahid was going to join me, but I thought it would be good to at least hear the spoken language. And if you want, we can have a small chat so that your ear starts to have a little flavor of what it sounds in while people are conversing. And just to remind people, he's a male, he's not trying to be an ageist, slightly older. I respect him. I know the family, lovely family. I'm very fond of his missus, but I would like to address him in the formal manner. So the extent and structure, and later I'm going to take a liberty with him and address him at the second level. I dare not address him at the third level, but it kind of gives a flavor to your ear how the structure changes when I address something formally. So I met him today after a long time, and if I saw him on the street in COVID-19, I don't know when I would see anybody on the street, but let's say I did, my response would be, Salaam Alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
क्या हाल है आपके?
अल्लाह का शुक्र है, अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह।
घर वाले कैसे हैं आपके?
घर वाले खैरियत से हैं, अच्छे हैं, शुक्रिया।
Okay, so I'm asking him, Salaam Alaikum, peace be on you, a common Arabic greeting. And then I say, Kya hal hai aapke? How are the conditions with you? But I use the word term aap because that's formal and that's respectful. And then I say, Kya hal hai aapke? And he says, Main theek hoon, Allah ka shukr. I am fine. Allah is merciful. I'm good. Then I say, Kya hal hai aapke ghar walon ke? So now the structure is referring to, in a formal manner, to his family members. And he also replies at the formal level, if you will, but I don't think the response carries that much formal structure. Now let's jump to the informal, with my apologies to Shahid ahead of time, but just to give a flavor. Salaam Alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
तुम्हारा क्या हाल है?
ठीक है, ठीक है।
तुम्हारे घर वाले कैसे हैं?
वो भी बहुत अच्छे हैं।
So I immediately switched the word aap, noun, to tumhara or tumhara. Kya hal hai, not hai. And these are subtle sounds which I don't expect you to really pick up right away. But as a native Urdu speaker, you would know, boom, right away, this lady and this man have an informal relationship. Now, if I really had known them, this family from childhood, or he was my younger brother, or he was my, God, for instance, is so considered close to us and beloved, and people have that close relationship with God that they address God at the third most informal level, which is tu. Tera kya hal hai? Tu kaisi hai? Tu kaisa hai? And that shows this close sense of familiarity. However, if I jump to the third level without really knowing the person that well, it would be considered extremely, extremely rude. It all depends on how close the two friends are. I have a friend in California. I talk to her quite often. There is not a day goes by when I want to give her a hard time, I switch to the third level. But when I am just talking about daily life, I'm at the second level. I was talking to her brother, who I've known since I knew this childhood friend of mine. And we used to joke around, and he's like a brother. And we try to keep at the formal level, but we keep switching to the second level because it seems so artificial. And so just to kind of give a flavor, and I want you to just hear a snippet of this conversation, but pay attention to the number of English words that have snuck in to the language. And I'm not sure if you will. One of the things that I find is difficult in these Zoom presentations, and I've had the same issue with my students, is YouTube videos don't stream at this.
Yeah, it's a shame. We've had that issue. I'm not sure the best way to combat it, unfortunately.
I think you know, when I'm at college, the broadband and the kind of resources that you have is incredible. But when we are at home, it's just like putting New York City's traffic
Right.
in a narrow street in Kansas City. So unfortunately, but it just kind of, one of the things I wanted to point out was that there are a lot of words from the English language that have now crept into English, into Urdu, and we are writing them in Urdu as well, which is incredible. So, you know, flight, PIA's or American Airlines flight. Now people will not write, I'm not even sure, what would be the appropriate word for flight, Shahid?
Flight, उड़ान कहते हैं, उड़ान कह सकते हैं, लेकिन but flight is flight, you know, it is.
Yeah, so now what we find is that there are no equivalent words because the language, we haven't researched, we haven't developed.
Right.
For instance, electricity. In Arabic, you would call it kahraba. But in Urdu now, people say bijli. Bijli, yeah. But then people always, normally while they're talking, they will also say electricity, you know? So interestingly, a lot of the words have crept in. But similarly, I have to say that several words in the English language owe their origins to Urdu as well. Can some come to mind? Yeah. What comes to mind? Well, for one, a kamarband, you know, that we wear formally. Kamar actually means waist, and band means something that is tightened around the waist. That's one word that I can think of. Another would be, I think, veranda, you know, is called, what is it called in Urdu, Shahid? Veranda.
Baramda.
Baramda.
Same thing.
You can see how similar it sounds, veranda and baramda, okay? The wall, we call it, in English, Urdu, we call it diwar. Sounds very familiar, doesn't it? So anyhow, moving forward.
Can I add a couple of snippets here?
Pardon?
Can I add to your talk a couple of things?
Absolutely.
Okay, just everyone, all the friends there. In Kansas City, I estimate that there is close to about 10,000 people, if not families, who come from India, Indo-Pak subcontinent, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Kashmir. And I would say, I know many of those people, 80%, I would say safely, understand Urdu. And why they also understand Urdu, that one of the most popular thing are the Bollywood movies, which is the largest film industry, and most of those movies are use Urdu as their prime language, and all the songs and the poetry is in that. So hitting closer to home, and I would say somewhere between 5 to 8,000 people living in and around Kansas City can understand Urdu.
Absolutely. And, um, I was giving a presentation at in Shawnee Mission North, I think it was, and I was talking to some of the teachers, and they said there are roughly 62 languages being spoken in the Kansas City area alone. So many. It is. I would never have thought that this would become such a diverse melting pot. What I have on the screen now is to give you a little flavor of how the language or the letters that I showed earlier can be used to create graphic images, because typically in Islam, you probably don't want to, at least in certain parts in religious institutions, you want the ornate designs, but you do not want the human image. And so they use the lettering to create beautiful images. And that is because calligraphy, or the written form of the language, is considered a supreme form of paying homage or tribute to God Almighty. Here is another image that I wanted to share. Again, using the letters, you're creating images from nature, a flower or a dove or a bird or what have you. So, it was sort of fortuitous that Shahid just mentioned about Bollywood film industry influencing the language. But here is where I find there is certain cause for concern, if you will, in terms of losing the purity of the language. What is happening is that as popular as Bollywood films are becoming, and because Urdu has been influenced by Turkish, by Persian, and by Arabic, these three languages, but since the place of origin is Delhi, like I mentioned at the start of my presentation, there are certain words, especially from Sanskrit, that have also influenced Urdu. So today, the Bollywood film industry, even though it relies for the most part on the poetry, on the songs, on Urdu, it is changing the pronunciation. And unfortunately, I think actors and actresses and singers, but I would say mostly the popular actors and actresses in Pakistan, are starting to emulate the pronunciation of the Bollywood stars. And it's a bit of a concern because the richness of those guttural sounds. So for instance, anger is considered wussa, wussa. But the Bollywood stars, not able to pronounce the gha sound, they say gussa, gussa. It's flat, gussa. And so now I find a lot of the Pakistanis, in order to gain popularity across the border, maybe, they are starting to fall into that. And some of the words are starting to creep into the Urdu language as well. Increasing use of English in the language, now that's a global issue. And I think that is where French are complaining about the same thing. The Chinese are complaining about the same thing. And I think increasingly, in order to keep up with the West, the purity of the languages is being lost. And I, for one, I feel that today, in order for economic security, probably, or in order to gain stature, I find the man on the street is really getting away from Urdu, but is going more towards English. So when I land at the airport in Karachi or any other major city, and I was there just a few months ago, you know, the man on the street, the average guy who is on a daily wage worker, he may not be able to speak the language, but the people who would normally converse in their language are starting to get away and starting to become more and more fluent in English language. Because the better you speak English, the better the stature in the society.
Yes, that I recognize that, and that's a part of a social change or social modification. I wanted to also add to Samira's talk another aspect of Urdu language. Urdu language having its rich roots in Persian, in particularly, and Turkish and Arabic and Sanskrit. These are very rich cultures of the old, and so it has the beauty and the depth and the width, so much so that besides in communicating actions and stories, it also has the ability to convey a lot of feelings in different forms, and that takes a language to a level. There are a few languages in the world which do the same thing, which convey the feelings, and there is tremendous poetry and prose which has been done by scholars and poets in this language, which are really beautiful, and they form a very important part of the culture of that region.
I couldn't agree more. Maybe there are two simple theories of mine, and I don't know, people may agree or disagree, but I feel the more nuances a language can convey in terms of feelings, in terms of thoughts, in terms of emotions, in terms of action, and the more complex the cuisine, the more evolved the culture. So those cultures, maybe certain sub-Saharan tribal cultures where the cuisines are not as complex, maybe not a juxtaposition of so many flavors, and maybe where the language expresses some, of course it's used for communication, but if the language is not as used in terms of conveying the different forms of human emotion, maybe the culture needs to evolve greater. So that's just my 2 cents worth of observations. And like I said, people may agree or not agree on that one. The next thing that I think, and Shahid can agree or disagree on that one, but what I find is that when people nowadays in Pakistan and Urdu speaking, like I said, in Britain for the major part, or even in Kansas City, I would say that when people are speaking, they will use regional influences of other languages that we speak in Pakistan. So somebody might use a word from Punjabi and introduce it in Urdu. Somebody might be, I am ethnically from the south and Shahid is from the north, towards the north. So my native language, my dad's language, is Sindhi, or actually he was Baloch, Balochi Sindhi. So I heard Balochi between my uncles, and I heard Sindhi. So it's natural for me, let's say when I'm speaking Urdu, that I can introduce words of the Sindhi language, but I take more liberty of that when I'm talking to somebody that I know is ethnically Sindhi. I'm speaking Urdu, but I will introduce words of Sindhi language in there. Similarly, when child is speaking Urdu with a Punjabi friend, he may take more liberties in bringing Punjabi words in Urdu language. And I think it's, just a casual observation, there are roughly 30, 32 languages in Pakistan alone, and many, many other dialects. It becomes quite complex to retain the purity of the language. And I wish that the Pakistani academic institutions would really promote the prose and the poetry. I don't know if I have. I think this is one of my last slides. Yes. So there are resources for those of you who would like to learn more about Urdu, because I personally tell my international business students, it's not just a beautiful, beautiful language. And as I've shown you the script, it's a beautiful script, which, by the way, we as South Asians use the Persian script, which is called the Nastaliq script. And it's different from the Arabic script, which is called Naskh. And the difference, in case you're thinking, in South Asian, Nastaliq script is at an angle, but the Naskh script is horizontal. So I was in Turkey a few months ago, and when I'm there and I look at all these monuments, obviously the Ottoman Empire and the Persians who came and all of that, all of those scripts are written in the Nastaliq script, in the Persian script, which is at an angle. And I think if I could, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to share, and please forgive me because I'm not very good in using my mouse, but just to kind of give you an idea, Chachi, this is, and again, not the best to write with the mouse. This is Chachi, written in the Nastaliq script, and this is my humble attempt it's not as angular as it is horizontal. So this would be considered the Nastaliq script, and when it is horizontal, this is Naskh. So there is a difference in which Arabic is written and the way we use it, so to speak. Anyhow, that's about all I wanted to convey. And I am open for any questions, comments, concerns, if you will.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to either unmute your mic and ask them, or feel free to use the chat function as well.
Just like my students, I love it. Either I was so thorough or I bored you guys to death. Either way, we're good.
So the written language, does it vary a lot, or is it pretty much people can all read it the same way?
The written language tends to be more formal, like, for instance, a marriage certificate written in Urdu would have to use very formal language and written formally. But if I'm writing an email, or if I'm writing a letter, I can get away with informality, so to speak. Maybe introduce certain words that are English words, but use Arabic, the script basically is Arabic script, but adapted with the sounds, as I mentioned, Persian sounds, then I can get away with writing it informally. I don't know whether that was your question or did I not answer it?
Yeah, that answers.
Okay.
Looks like Joan asked how to say thank you in Urdu.
Oh, that's a common one. And I think if I can kind of give you here a little flavor that, you know, in Arabic, it's shukran. In Urdu, it's shukriya. So shukriya, shukran. In Turkish, tashakkur, just an addition of a little T sound, tashakkur. And then in Farsi, it's also tashakkur. And as a kid, I had to learn 7 years of Persian, and my mom was a fluent Persian speaker because she grew up and was educated in India. But unfortunately, with all these languages, I speak 5 right now, but you start it starts to combine and you start losing it. So, but certain words, you can get away with it. If I had to tell you 3 or 4 phrases that will get you by in Pakistan, shukriya is a good one. Or Salaam Alaikum gets you in Turkey, all over the Muslim world, all over the Muslim world. And just an informal, kya hal hai? Kya hal hai? How are you? You can get away with saying theek hu or alhamdulillah. You know, alhamdulillah. So again, there is so much of Arabic influence, there's so much of Persian influence that you can sort of float in and out, if you will.
All right, does anyone have any last questions here before we wrap up? Well, if not, thank you again so much, Samira, for donating your time this evening. And thank you all so much for joining us and being so supportive over these last several months of us doing our programs digitally. It means a lot that you've stuck with us during this time. And if you would like to learn about future programs that we have, you can head to irckc.org. And hopefully you can join us for one of our programs that we have coming up. You can also feel free to support the IRC by texting IRC to our Donate to Give number, which is 816-844-6032. I'll drop that in the chat real quick. And please join us for a future program. And again, Samira, thank you so much for giving this wonderful lesson.
Oh, believe me, this is my pleasure, and I'm so heartened to know. And thank you, Evan, and thank you to Matt for doing what you do. It makes all of us in the greater Kansas City area, and I am so heartened to know that Shahid is on the board. I have been a past board member at IRC, and I have also enjoyed my programs that I've presented to the school kids. And not at the risk of stating the obvious, I'm going to say, as an educator in higher education for the last 25 years, nothing reaffirms my faith in what I do as much as what the programs that you folks put out, Evan. And I'm so grateful that as soon as I offered, you didn't take a second to take me up on my offer and communicated with me. And I thank all of you who've taken the time today to come and learn a language, a little bit of my language, my origin. And honestly, by taking the time to listen, you validated my identity, my humanity. And I can say the same thing for Shahid. I'm sure you feel the same way, that when you learn somebody's language, when you learn even a phrase, you validate them. And I think today we need this more than ever. So thank you everyone for joining me. And I'd love to take part in future programs. And thank you, Evan, for all that you do. All right.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Have a good night, everyone.